Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When Grant Ellis moved off-grid to escape the noise of the world, he didn't expect war until an HOA he didn't belong to tried to steal his land. What started with a letter turned into sabotage, conspiracy, and a battle for survival. One man, one home, one hell of a fight. I just finished tightening the last bolt on the backup battery rack when I got the letter. It was a thick white envelope taped to my front gate, sealed with the golden crest of something that called itself Sage Hills Preserve Community Association. The font alone gave me a headache. I wasn't a member of any association. That was part of the reason I'd bought this place. 5 acres of isolated Colorado dirt, no neighbors within shouting range, no bylaws telling me what color mulch to use, just me, my tools, and a house I rebuilt from the slab up after my divorce. The letter inside was even more ridiculous than the envelope. It was full of words like unauthorized dwelling, non-compliant aesthetic integration, and my personal favorite, failure to submit improvement plans to the board. The punchline: a fee schedule for non-members who wish to integrate harmoniously with the community. It totaled $5,000, due within 10 business days. I chuckled out loud and walked it straight to the fire pit behind my workshop. Burned like old pine. Then I went back inside and wrote a short, polite letter of my own. Included scanned copies of the property deed, county zoning map, my boundary survey with GPS coordinates, and the signed acknowledgement from the county that this parcel was outside the Sage Hills HOA jurisdiction. I printed it, sealed it, and drove it over to their management office. They had the kind of building that looked like it should be serving wine tastings, not property disputes. I handed the letter to the receptionist, smiled, and told her, "This is probably the most polite response you're going to get from me. Have a nice day." That was on a Monday. By Wednesday, 2 sheriff's deputies were standing on my porch. One was young, new to the job, trying too hard. The other was older, with the kind of tired that only comes from answering too many calls like this. "Mr. Grant Ellis?" the senior deputy asked, hand resting near his radio. "That's me. Can I help you?" "We got a call from a concerned resident. Claimed there's an illegally occupied structure on this property. Unsafe foundation. Possibly a squatter situation." I raised an eyebrow. "A squatter? I've been living here legally for the last 6 months. Want to see the title?" I led them inside, straight to my office. Pulled out a binder thicker than a phone book. Deed, inspection reports, engineering certification, permits. All notarized, all current. The older deputy flipped through the papers slowly, nodding. "Looks airtight." I offered them a cup of coffee. They declined, but the younger one peeked out the front window toward the street. "Lady in a beige Lexus was watching us when we pulled in. She took off when she saw you come to the door." I smiled. "Let me guess. Blonde bob, real estate tan, pearls even on a Wednesday." The older deputy smirked. "That'd be the one." I walked them out and thanked them for their time. As they left, I stood there on the gravel, arms crossed, watching the empty stretch of road and wondering just how far this was going to go. Turns out, that was just the introduction. The envelope should have been my warning. The cops on my porch, the second, but the third sign. That came wrapped in red tape and sounded like sirens. It was just after 9 on a Saturday morning. I was elbows deep under the kitchen sink, replacing the PEX line I should have swapped out a week ago, when I heard the unmistakable wail of a fire engine rolling up my gravel drive. I wiped my hands, stepped outside, and sure enough, big red truck, lights flashing, a pair of firefighters hopping out in full gear. One of them, a guy with a clipboard and mirrored shades, called out, "Sir, we received a report of a gas leak on this property. Step back, please." I blinked. "A gas leak? You're kidding." "No, sir. It was called in anonymously. Strong odor reported. Hazard level 2. I held up my hands. "You're welcome to check, but I run on a sealed propane system with full alarms. I'd already be unconscious if there was a leak." Still, they did their job. I watched from a safe distance as they combed around the tanks, the generator shed, even walked the perimeter with sniffers. After 15 minutes, clipboard guy walked back over, clearly annoyed. "No leak, no odor, no readings. Either someone's pulling your leg, or they're trying to screw with you." I gave him a tight smile. Guess which one I'm betting on. As they packed up, I noticed a familiar beige Lexus slow roll past the front gate. Karen. She didn't even try to hide it this time. She rolled her window down slightly, stared straight at me, then drove off like she owned the whole mountain. I wasn't in the mood to play defense anymore. That afternoon, I drove into town and picked up 3 additional trail cams with night vision, plus 2 motion-activated spotlights and a low-profile mic array with auto record. The perimeter was already solid, but now I wanted eyes and ears on every blind spot, especially the wellhead, the pump system, and the sub-basement where I kept my battery inverters. Sunday morning, I set it all up. Poles, power, hidden wiring, Wi-Fi backup, auto-sync to cloud, the works. By Monday, I had a full perimeter of surveillance and an alert system that pinged my phone the second anyone crossed the line. I also filed a formal incident report with the fire department, noting the false call and request for information on the source. I knew they wouldn't tell me who placed it. Not yet. But I wanted it on record. Later that week, I started noticing subtle things. Footprints outside the fence line. 2 sets, both heavy-soled, not mine. My water filter in the pump house had been loosened, just a quarter turn, not enough to cause a leak, but enough to eventually cause pressure drop. And there was a small plastic flag stuck into the ground near the north wall of the house, the kind surveyors use, except I hadn't called any surveyor. I dug around the flag. Just 6 inches down, the dirt had been disturbed recently. Clean-cut edges like a post-hole digger had been used. I didn't like where this was going. That night, just before 2 a.m., I got my first ping, motion detected near the southeast wall. I pulled up the live cam feed and watched 2 figures move silently along the house in reflective vests. One held a flashlight low to the ground. The other carried what looked like a drill case. I didn't move. I didn't shout. I watched. I recorded. They left within 10 minutes, but they'd scraped away enough of the surface soil to reach the foundation skirt, and from what I could see, they'd drilled 2 small pilot holes. Barely noticeable, unless you were the guy who poured and tested that foundation yourself, which I was. In the morning, I checked the site. They'd covered the holes with pebbles and mulch. Sloppy. I went back inside, copied the footage to an external drive, and started logging every second. The audio was choppy, but one phrase came through crystal clear. She said to make it look natural. They weren't just harassing me now. They were laying groundwork. Literally. By Thursday morning, I was past the point of hoping this would burn out on its own. The sabotage attempts, the false emergencies, none of it was subtle anymore. And yet, the sheer audacity of what happened next still managed to piss me off on a cellular level. I was in the workshop fixing a cracked welding mask when I heard tires on gravel, not the UPS guy. This was slower, deliberate. I stepped outside, and there she was, in the flesh. Karen Moultrie, president of Sage Hills Preserve HOA, standing at the end of my drive like some suburban dictator surveying disputed territory. She was flanked by 2 other board members, both dressed like lawyers on a country club field trip. Karen held a clipboard like it was a weapon. "Mr. Ellis," she called out, like she hadn't just sent fire trucks and contractors to trespass on my property. "We need to speak with you immediately." "Then speak," I said, not moving an inch closer. She stepped forward, heels crunching gravel. "We've received multiple reports about the structural integrity of your home. There are concerns that it's endangering the aesthetic and safety of the surrounding neighborhood. The board is prepared to issue a formal demand for evacuation pending review." I stared at her for a long second. That was a lot of syllables to say absolutely nothing. "You're not my HOA. You have no jurisdiction here. And your reports came from 2 jackasses who drilled holes in my foundation last night." Her face didn't flinch. "We'll be pursuing legal remedies." I gestured to the visible boundary marker beside the drive, a reinforced steel post sunk into concrete, installed by the county. "Remind your lawyer to bring a map." One of her lapdogs, a man with perfectly gelled hair and the personality of a pylon, piped up. "You're being uncooperative. That won't go well for you." I smiled. "You'll love what's coming next, then." I didn't bother watching them leave. I went back inside, pulled the hard drive from my camera system, and began editing the previous night's footage. A clean 5-minute clip of the 2 men, complete with infrared timestamps and their soft voices on the mic. I labeled the file 01_HOA_sabotage.mp4. That afternoon, I got a call from my HR department. I work as a private consultant for a national structural inspection firm. The HR rep sounded hesitant. "Hey Grant, this is awkward, but we got a complaint submitted to our licensing board. Anonymous, but it was CC'd to us. It claims you're falsifying engineering reports and that you lied about your certifications." Also, something about improper construction methods on your own property. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the phone. Sorry, I said when I caught my breath. That's all crap. I can forward you my entire license package and third-party inspections. I figured, he said. But just so you know, someone's out to get you. I didn't need a DNA test to guess who. I forwarded everything, my credentials, third-party evaluations of my own house, signed reports from 2 licensed engineers. Then I added the video of the anonymous men carving up my foundation like a holiday ham. And I wasn't done. The next morning, I filed an official complaint with the county building authority, not just about the sabotage, but about intentional misrepresentation of HOA jurisdiction. I attached maps, my title history, and highlighted where Sage Hills ended, a full 120 feet before my driveway started. I also sent the same footage and documentation to the sheriff's office, labeling it attempted criminal damage to property. I made a fresh pot of coffee, leaned back in my chair, and waited. But just when I thought I had a moment to breathe, I noticed something new. A thin white plastic flag, stuck in the dirt by my generator shed. A few feet away, a matching one fluttered beside my well cap. Surveyor flags. Only I hadn't called for a survey. I didn't touch the new flags. I just stood there for a minute, staring at them like they might move on their own. I had already dug one up by the foundation last week, and now they were closer to critical systems. The generator, the well cap, same type of marker, same cheap plastic base you'd get from a contractor's van, which meant someone had been back. Again, only now they were pushing in deeper, getting bolder. I pulled out my phone and opened the camera logs. Motion alert, time-stamped 2 hours after midnight. 2 people, one with a bag of flags, the other scanning with what looked like ground-penetrating radar. They moved like they had done it before. Quick, silent, efficient, except they weren't invisible. Not to me. I clipped the footage, saved the audio. Again, they mentioned Karen said, and began building what I was now officially calling my war file. It already had 3 videos, 2 incident reports, timestamps, audio, survey maps, and now another. Entry, coordinated attempts to mark critical underground infrastructure. I spent the morning cataloging everything. By noon, I was heading into town with a manila folder and a thumb drive. First stop, the sheriff's office. Detective Alan Cruz was waiting for me. He was the kind of guy who looked like he'd rather be fixing his truck than sitting under fluorescent lights. But I liked him for that. Practical, grounded. He flipped through the folder slowly. You saying this is all one coordinated action? I nodded. That's exactly what I'm saying. They're laying the groundwork to claim my house is unsafe. They're manipulating the ground beneath the foundation. Then they'll call for another inspection, their inspector probably, try to have the house condemned. He looked up at me. That's a hell of an accusation. Good thing I brought proof. I passed him the drive. He plugged it in, pulled up the thermal footage from the southeast wall, the digging, the drilling, the setup. Then the surveyor clips from last night, and, finally, the audio. Clear, unmistakable. She said to focus on the north and east sides, says they'll crumble first if we do it right. He sat back in his chair. Jesus Christ. Tell me about it. Cruz nodded slowly, eyes still on the screen. All right. I'm filing a criminal mischief and trespassing report. Might escalate this to attempted property damage. I'll also request a warrant for the contractor Karen's using. We've seen their trucks in a noise complaint case last year. That got ugly too. Before I left, I gave him names, the HOA's preferred vendor list, taken from their own website, and a PDF copy of the HOA board roster with Karen's signature on 3. Recent contractor approvals. Next stop was my lawyer, Caroline Huxley, ex-prosecutor turned civil litigator. She had the demeanor of a cobra in reading glasses and hated bullies more than anything. Once she saw the video and the emails, her eyes lit up. We're not just filing a harassment suit, she said. We're going after them for civil conspiracy, fraudulent interference with real property, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. This isn't HOA nonsense anymore. This is sabotage. She called in her own forensic engineer that afternoon to assess the foundation. The guy was ex-military, now a structural integrity consultant for disaster recovery projects. He walked the property with a ground scanner, took samples from the subsurface where the flags were planted, and within the hour told us, they've been draining soil out slowly under this section here. Looks like an engineered subsidence setup. Pipe system, low-pressure wash, small shifts over time. Classic displacement trick. He took samples, photos, ran density scans. I watched him uncover a section where the soil had been deliberately watered to create erosion pockets, right under my water tank pad. This was surgical, calculated. They weren't trying to destroy the house outright. They wanted to weaken it just enough to make it fail inspection. Caroline wasn't smiling anymore. She put her phone down after a call with the DA's office. "I think we can prove intent," she said. "You've got evidence of trespassing, damage, motive, coordination, and the HOA has a financial interest in removing you. Property values, conformity, annexation. They want you gone. How long until we get to court?" She looked me dead in the eye. "We don't wait. We file now. Civil suit against HOA and Karen Moultrie personally. Simultaneously, the sheriff's office starts the criminal track. And we request a restraining order with immediate effect." That night, I didn't sleep much. I double-checked the generator fuel, walked the perimeter 3 times, added 2 more cams near the east wall. My dog Duke, a 70-pound lab mix, kept pacing with me, tail stiff, ears back. He didn't trust the air, and neither did I. At 2:37 a.m., I got another alert. This time, only one person, tall, hoodie, carrying what looked like a tablet and a short tool case. I let them get close, watched them kneel beside the east foundation panel and start drilling. Then I hit the floodlights. They froze, squinting into the sudden blaze. I walked out slowly with a flashlight in one hand and a .45 on my hip. "Care to explain what the hell you're doing on private property at this hour?" The guy bolted. I didn't chase. Duke did. He went full berserker mode, and whoever that was barely cleared the fence before Duke snapped the corner of his backpack off with his jaws. I recovered the piece, a canvas strap with the logo of Stone and Ridge Construction printed on the inside. Same contractor tied to Karen's last 3 HOA projects. Game over. By sunrise, I was already on the phone with Caroline. I told her what happened, described the man, the drill, the canvas strap, and how Duke nearly made him a chew toy. She didn't even pause. "That's attempted criminal sabotage," she said. "And if we can tie it to Karen's contractor, it becomes a conspiracy charge. I'll call crews." An hour later, 2 deputies rolled up my drive. They took the broken strap, reviewed the footage from my external cameras, and noted the logo. One of them, a guy named Barnes, muttered, "They're not even being careful anymore." That was the most disturbing part. They weren't hiding. They were escalating. Fast. By noon, crews called me back. "Grant," he said, "we served a warrant on Stone and Ridge's storage yard. We found multiple drone scans of your property, architectural schematics, and internal memos with the HOA logo printed in the margins. One doc outlined a post-eviction reclamation plan." He paused. "They planned for your house to be condemned, removed, and then the parcel annexed by the HOA as a greenbelt for future development. And there's an email chain with Karen's signature approving the contractor's exploratory soil procedures." I gripped the kitchen counter so hard my knuckles went white. Crews continued. "We're preparing a criminal conspiracy case. This is organized fraud, with trespassing, property damage, and possibly mail and wire fraud if any of those reports were filed electronically. We're bringing in a DA." I didn't even respond, just stood there, letting it settle. They tried to steal my home. And they thought it would work. That evening, Caroline filed for an emergency court hearing. It was granted for the following morning. The goal: a protective order against Karen Moultrie and the HOA board, including an immediate injunction preventing any physical entry onto my property and preservation of all HOA communications under subpoena. When I walked into court the next day, I didn't wear a suit. I wore jeans and a canvas shirt with dust still on it because I wanted them to see who they were trying to erase. Karen showed up in a beige business suit with matching purse and zero expression. Her lawyer looked like he charged by the eyebrow raise. The judge, an older woman with a face like carved granite, read the initial filings in silence. When Caroline stood up, she didn't waste time. "Your Honor, my client's property rights have been violated in escalating stages. Surveillance footage, contractor links, flagged evidence, physical sabotage. This is not an HOA dispute. This is a hostile campaign to erase a legal homeowner from land they do not control for the benefit of annexation and development." She presented the evidence with surgical precision: time-stamped video, engineering scans, trespassing logs, construction maps, the drone footage recovered by police. Karen's lawyer stood and tried to play the misunderstanding card. We believe there has been confusion over property boundaries and miscommunication with vendors, not malice or coordination. Miss Moultrie has acted in good faith. The judge cut him off. Did she authorize foundation probing by a third-party contractor without consent from the property owner? He hesitated. That is under review. She either did or didn't, counsel. I believe she did. That was the end of that. The judge ruled in our favor, full temporary restraining order, immediate suspension of all HOA-related construction activities, and an order to preserve all HOA internal communications and financial transactions for the last 6 months. Karen didn't say a word as she left the courtroom, but her eyes were glassy, and I could feel it. She finally understood she was in deep. And I wasn't done yet. The next day, the local paper ran a front-page article. HOA President under fire for alleged sabotage of private home. My name was in it. So was Karen's. So was the phrase, criminal conspiracy under investigation. The community turned fast. By the weekend, several homeowners from the HOA reached out to me directly. One guy, Tom, said, "We didn't know it was that bad. I voted for her because she cleaned up the park." But this is crazy. Another woman emailed copies of internal HOA newsletters and one PDF attachment labeled Annexation Draft V 2.0. It included my lot number. They'd planned this for months, and now it was unraveling. The final blow came on Monday. Caroline received a call from a junior contractor who used to work for Stone and Ridge. He wanted whistleblower protection, said he had emails, ones that proved the whole inspection fraud was coordinated, that Karen knew the soil was intact and ordered it tampered with to simulate subsidence. Her words. She set it all in motion. Caroline looped the DA's office in immediately. The whistleblower was deposed. His emails were verified. And that was the last piece we needed. Karen Moultrie, HOA president, was arrested on Wednesday morning. Charge: felony conspiracy to commit property fraud with enhancements for organized planning and attempted personal enrichment through annexation fraud. I watched from my porch as the sheriff's cruiser took her away in cuffs. Duke barked once, wagged his tail, and sat beside me like he knew we'd won a battle, but not the war, because I had one more goal left. Make sure this HOA never breathes another threat toward me again. Karen's arrest changed everything, at least on the surface. For the first time in weeks, the HOA stopped acting like they owned my land. No more flags, no more strange vehicles idling at night, no more surveyors getting lost. But I knew better than to think it was over. You don't kill a snake just by cutting off the head. You have to make sure the body stops moving too. And this particular snake had deep roots. I spent the next few days combing through every document I could get my hands on. Caroline filed formal discovery motions, and as part of the criminal investigation, the DA's office began seizing digital records from the HOA servers. What came back was a gold mine or a landmine, depending how you looked at it. Meeting minutes, internal memos, budget proposals, all under the assumption that my property was going to be condemned and absorbed. They even budgeted for landscaping. There was a full timeline titled Reclamation Phase, which assumed I would be out of the house by October, evicted, or forcibly relocated under a city ordinance they planned to manipulate. They really thought they had it all figured out. But that wasn't the worst part. Buried deep in the emails was a letter of intent, a signed document between the HOA board and a private developer named Lexington Valley Partners. In it, the board promised to deliver my land, plus 3 other surrounding parcels, in exchange for a 10% cut of future development profits. The amount forecasted, over $4 million. It was outright theft, not theoretical, not accidental, but premeditated, deliberate theft. I was furious, but I was also clear-headed. Caroline said, "We don't just take this to court, we bury them with it. Public exposure, civil court, federal property fraud if we're lucky. These people don't get to just resign and walk away." And I agreed. The goal wasn't just justice anymore, it was precedent, so we went public. Caroline held a press conference on the courthouse steps. News vans showed up from Phoenix, even a few from California. She laid it all out. The plot, the contractors, the false reports, the damage to my foundation, and the attempted financial fraud. Then she handed over flash drives with redacted evidence to every journalist who wanted one. That same night, my phone didn't stop ringing. Neighbors, reporters, angry HOA members. Even a city council member called me personally and said, "If you ever want to file a civil rights claim under property law statutes, we'll support it." Meanwhile, the rest of the HOA board started scattering like roaches under a flashlight. One resigned immediately. Another, the treasurer, tried to claim he was never aware of the full plan, but we had his signature on the internal budget. Too late for remorse. 2 days later, the HOA called an emergency meeting, virtual of course. Caroline and I were invited as observers, which turned out to be a mistake on their part because we recorded the whole thing. Their new acting president, a Weasley guy named Brent Kessler, tried to sound calm and professional, but his voice kept cracking. "We're discussing potential liabilities resulting from actions taken by the former president and others," he said. I unmuted myself once and asked, "Are you referring to the attempt to steal my land and destroy my home's foundation to make it easier?" He went pale and muted me. Didn't matter. The damage was done. Half the attendees, regular HOA members, had no idea what had been going on behind closed doors. Now they were asking questions, loudly. After the meeting, 2 former board members contacted Caroline to cooperate in exchange for leniency. One of them handed over proof that the entire HOA insurance fund had been secretly drained into a legal contingency account, used to pay for bribes and expedited permits. Another nail in the coffin. By the end of the week, the state HOA Regulatory Commission issued a temporary suspension of the HOA's operational authority. It was the equivalent of a death sentence. They could no longer enforce rules, collect dues, or make decisions. The board was officially powerless, but that still didn't fix what they had already done to my home, so I took a different kind of action. With Caroline's help, I filed a civil suit against the HOA as an entity, Karen Moultrie personally, the contractors involved, and Lexington Valley Partners. The charge sheet was a monster: criminal conspiracy, fraud, trespassing, property damage, defamation, harassment, and attempted unlawful seizure of land. I wasn't asking for a simple payout. I was asking for everything. Full restitution, damages, punitive awards, and a court order preventing them from ever interacting with my property again. The judge accepted the case for fast tracking. In the meantime, I hired my own crew to repair the damaged soil around the foundation. The contractor I brought in was ex-military, like me, and understood the need for discretion. He also confirmed something chilling. The eastern trench they'd started carving into the hill above my house wasn't just cosmetic. If they'd kept it up another week or two, a heavy storm could have caused a mudslide right into my foundation. They weren't just trying to condemn the house. They were trying to destroy it, with me still inside. I stood on the porch that night, staring at the stars above the ridge, thinking about how close I came to losing everything. But I hadn't, because I fought back, and they had no idea what I had planned next. The court set the first civil hearing for the following Tuesday, and in the days leading up to it, my property turned into something between a command post and a crime scene. Deputies came out again to take new statements after my contractor submitted a report showing clear signs of tampering with drainage channels, intentional misdirection of runoff that could have undermined the slope below my foundation during the next rain. They brought a forensic engineer with them. She crouched near the carved trench, ran her hand along the edge, and said bluntly, "This wasn't erosion. This was sabotage." I stood behind her, arms folded, watching as she took samples. You think they were trying to bury the house? Not bury it, break it. If this soil gave out, she tapped the edge with her pen, you'd have lost your foundation by winter. That was it. I told Caroline, I want them charged with attempted destruction of a residence, not just fraud. She agreed. We added it to the lawsuit. The next battlefront opened in a completely different arena, the bank. Apparently, the HOA had used a line of credit to fund much of the unlawful construction and sabotage efforts, and they had done so using falsified collateral documents, including a forged easement over my property. When the bank learned about the fraud, they froze the HOA's accounts and launched their own internal investigation. That meant the HOA was now facing liability from 2 directions, my lawsuit and their own financial backers. It was beautiful. On Monday morning, one of the news stations showed footage of HOA members lining up at their clubhouse, demanding answers. A couple of angry homeowners shouted at the acting board members. One guy yelled, "You used my dues to fund criminal fraud." Another woman screamed, "My husband's in that contractor firm. He's innocent." I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. Tuesday came fast. When I stepped into the courtroom, it was standing room only. Journalists, local residents, lawyers, a few HOA members who now looked like hostages at their own funeral. Karen wasn't there. She was still under house arrest pending the criminal case, but her lawyer showed up, visibly sweating. Caroline and I sat down, handed over the evidence files, and waited. The judge, a sharp-eyed man named Rourke, opened with a scathing summary. The materials presented indicate a coordinated, deliberate, and prolonged campaign to subvert the property rights of a private citizen. I find the grounds sufficient to proceed with the civil case under accelerated review. Then came the gut punch. I also find preliminary grounds to authorize punitive damages, subject to final determination after witness testimony. That meant the case wasn't just about reimbursement. It was about punishment. We were now talking about millions in damages, possibly enough to bankrupt the HOA entirely and nail Karen and her allies to the wall. The trial date was set for 6 weeks out, and in the meantime, I wasn't done making my point. Caroline and I held a town hall in the local community center. I stood in front of dozens of residents from the HOA and beyond and walked them through the evidence. I told them exactly how close they'd come to living next to a landslide, how their money had been used to fuel criminal actions, and how the president they trusted had orchestrated the whole thing with one goal: take land that didn't belong to them. There was silence at first, and then applause. A few former HOA members even walked up to me afterward and offered sworn statements in support of my case. One of them had kept emails Karen sent from her personal account. In one message, she literally wrote, "No one's going to stop us. He's just one guy with a crumbling house and a dog. This land will be ours." I printed that one and framed it. 2 days later, a grand jury added another charge to Karen's case: criminal conspiracy to commit environmental endangerment. That carried a possible sentence of 10 years if convicted. She'd gone from smug president to future inmate in less than a month. And yet, I knew better than to celebrate too early. One night that week, just after midnight, I heard movement out back. I went out with a flashlight, gun holstered, Duke at my side. Near the far end of the property, I found a bundle of survey flags and a brand new wooden stake hammered into the soil. This one with red paint and a crudely taped note: future community trail access, pending HOA jurisdiction. I stared at it for a full minute. Then I ripped it out of the ground, snapped it in half, and threw it in the burn barrel. No matter what games they tried to play next, I was ready, because the land was mine, and I'd earned every square foot. The morning of the trial, I stood on my front porch, sipping strong coffee as the sunrise bled over the Rockies. The air was cold and clear, and for the first time in weeks, it felt like my land was finally breathing again, like the weight pressing down on it had started to lift. But I wasn't naive enough to think the battle was over just because the enemy was scattered. I knew how these people operated. Even cornered rats bite. We arrived at the courthouse just before 9. Caroline was in full tactical mode. Dark suit, no-nonsense face, folders organized like she'd been waiting for this her entire career. And maybe she had. I sure knew I had. Karen arrived in a tan prison-issued blazer, wrists uncuffed but flanked by 2 deputies. Her face was a canvas of resentment and fear. Her attorney looked like a man aging in real time. The trial opened with witness testimony. Engineers, forensic experts, even the contractor I'd hired, who gave a chilling breakdown of how close the slope was to failing. Then came the paper trail: emails, maps, forged permits, internal HOA budgets. Caroline walked the court through each item with the precision of a surgeon. No theatrics, just brutal surgical truth. But the moment that shifted everything came when Caroline called their former treasurer, a man named Rick Matheson, to the stand. He had flipped weeks ago and now sat under oath, clearly rattled but honest. "She ordered the trench," he said, nodding toward Karen. "She told us, make the house unstable. Once it's condemned, he'll have no choice but to leave. She even said we should leave the damage to worsen with winter rains." Gasps in the courtroom. Karen paled. Rick continued. And when we raised concerns about legal exposure, she said, quote, "Let the lawyers handle the mess. We'll have the land and the board will be protected." Caroline's voice was ice when she asked, "Was the board protected?" He shook his head. "No, we were lied to, just like everyone else." And just like that, the jury's mood turned. The judge recessed for an hour. When we returned, Caroline closed with the kind of statement that stays in people's heads for years. This wasn't just about property, it was about power, about people in gated communities deciding they were above the law, about someone believing that if she smiled hard enough and made her neighbors feel small, she could get away with anything. But she forgot something. The land was never hers. And now, neither is her freedom. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. The verdict? Guilty on all counts. Civil liability affirmed. HOA dissolved under court order. Karen personally responsible for punitive damages totaling $4 million and immediate incarceration to await sentencing in the criminal case. But it didn't end there. In the following weeks, 3 more board members were indicted. The HOA's insurance refused to pay out, citing intentional criminal conduct. The developer they'd been scheming with pulled out of the region entirely. Local municipalities began drafting new ordinances to place stricter controls on HOA authority and land seizure attempts. Turns out, I wasn't the only one they'd tried to steamroll, just the one who fought back hard enough. I didn't want revenge, but I got justice. And a little poetic irony. 2 months later, the county auctioned off Karen's home, vehicles, and assets to cover the damages. I didn't attend the auction, but I sent Caroline with instructions to buy one thing if it came up. Karen's prized cast-iron street sign that had stood outside her house for over a decade. HOA President, Private Property. You're being watched. It now hangs on my barn wall. Bent, rusting, and spray-painted with one word across the top. Evicted. As for me, I rebuilt, replanted, reinforced the hill with new retaining walls. The house stands stronger than ever. And I installed cameras of my own. Not because I live in fear, but because I know the game now. You don't survive a war like this without learning one thing. When someone tries to take what's yours, you don't wait. You fight, and you finish it.